Welcome to Unsolicited UX, a podcast full of advice and opinions that you didn't ask for. I'm Jay Keatsman, and each month I'll be sitting down with a professional from the world of UX, product design, and tech to dig into their work, their wins, and their lessons learned, so you don't have to. Whether you're deep in the trenches or just a little UX curious, there's something here for everyone. Check out Unsolicited UX on Substack, Spotify, and YouTube, and enjoy the conversation. Hello, Julie Schiller. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jay. Really excited to join you today.
Could you start out by just introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Schiller. I'm a UX research lead at Google. I've been working in the field of UX for over 20 years. My background is initially as an automotive engineer where I worked in human factors at Ford Motor Company, trying to find all the right fits and sizes for different people in cars. And as screens started appearing in our center consoles in cars, I became very interested to know about how do we decide what should go on the screen. And so I have taken a master's degree in human-computer interaction, and for 20 years now I've been working around the world in the field of UX at some of the biggest companies.
I love that. You said that you have worked around the world. Can you share a little bit more about your experience working in different cultures?
Absolutely. So originally I'm from the States, from Detroit, which is why I was in the auto industry. So from there, I moved over to the UK where I studied, and then I worked in the London offices for the BBC. We were developing at the time a new idea, something called the iPlayer, which before there was Hulu, before there was Netflix, was this crazy idea that people might want to watch television on their desktop computer. So a lot of the research questions I had were centered around this. Would anyone ever watch television on their desktop computer when they had a big TV in their house? And so that was very interesting to see how a very British organization like the BBC developed product. Then I moved back to the US. I spent a lot of time at companies like Facebook and Autodesk and Google, where I spent a lot of time learning about how Silicon Valley is addressing different speedy challenges, how we can ship fast and break things, and how this more nimble, sort of creative point of view can take UX forward. And then 5 years ago, I moved out to Singapore in Asia, where I've been working on our emerging markets team and on Google search for Japan to really understand the Asian market, as well as building out teams in sub-Saharan Africa to understand how does sub-Saharan Africa, which is coming online at an incredible pace, how can we build products for them as well?
That's amazing. So you've really worked in multiple different markets.
Yeah, I find a real passion for looking at people across different cultures. I think often in UX, we can take a very weird, Western educated, industrialized perspective on our research and on our work and on our products. And it's really important, I think, to zoom out and remember that the way that people are shopping for food in different parts of the world are exactly how all of our grandmothers were shopping for food. And that this is a very normal way to live intergenerationally. And that has a massive effect on how people use digital products and physical products as well.
So are you currently working in a space that has both digital and physical products?
Currently, I work mainly on Google search for Japan, which is an entirely digital product, and really enjoy that challenge to understand the Japanese market. Japan really came online with a completely sort of different set of ecosystem of tools and products, and therefore their users have really different expectations about how products should function. So I mainly focus on digital at this point, but I have a number of different experiences working with hardware products as well.
Yeah, I want to ask about, because I think it's really interesting. You have a very interesting background. You've worked on some really key features of products or key products early, it seems like you were early in the automotive, you were early in streaming, which I want to ask about that. But in terms of your current work, you mentioned that you are in both Japan and sub-Saharan Africa.
I guess I'm curious if you have to, there seems like there might be a bit of code switching going on potentially. So how do you navigate two very different circumstances? And like, I'm thinking, like you mentioned that in Africa, it's a bit of an early adoption phase potentially. Is that more important to the work, or is understanding the culture more important, or can you not separate the two?
Fantastic question. So we're trying to think a lot about both how people are coming online. Remember, people are coming online all over the world, whether they're in Japan, whether they're in the US, whether they're in Kenya, whether they're in India. Their whole world has people who are coming online for the first time. And these aren't only very young people who are just coming online because of their youth. These aren't also very old people who just never got around to coming onto digital platforms. There's actually such a wide range of people with a range of different skills out there. So definitely agree that there's differences by market. Like different countries have different prevalences of something we'll call like a digital savviness in them. But that range from a very beginning user to a very experienced user exists in all countries. One of the big differences that I do see between different countries is the ecosystem around your product itself. People come into looking at your product based on what they're familiar with in other places. And when I was over at Facebook, we talked a lot about how some countries are Facebook countries where Facebook and Facebook Messenger are a really popular way to create groups and to message and to talk about their content. Some countries are more Instagram places where the visual stream and being able to DM, directly is much more prevalent. Some countries are more WhatsApp kind of countries where we see chat messaging being the main interface. So however people are coming into that tech ecosystem really affects their content. And on top of that, I think there is a layer of culture itself, the expectations of how should a digital product look and talk and speak to as though it was another person, which mirror how the cultures themselves expect interpersonal relationships to act. And one of the things I love about working in sub-Saharan Africa is nobody is hustling like Africa is hustling. It is an incredible place to see people bringing their passions online, in person, using all the resources at their disposal, trying multiple different sort of side hustles and main gigs and combining with passions they have to bring their whole self to their digital identity, to their, connections and circles. So I think that is super exciting. Where in other countries, there might be more standardized behavior about how to relate between people, such as in Japan, your public faces has a very important presence. And it's very important for people to have anonymity, for people to be able to have group consensus, to understand the group perception of what's going on. So there is definitely a culture layer that will fit on top of it. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about building digital products for a global audience is the opportunity to connect to all these different kinds of people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Uh, I would love to see or learn about the differences in the Google search experience by country, because I imagine there must be even legal constraints to what the experience will look like.
I can't go into a lot of depth about exactly country level differences for Google search. What I can say are some pretty well established information. One of the great books out there is The Culture Map, which Aaron sort of talks about how it's really important to be able to look at different dimensions of cultures and not saying there's one right way to be polite or one right way for people to engage, but really cultures are having these wide ranges of what looks appropriate behavior and also to realize, everything is relative. You're only looking at this culture from your own perspective, how your country works, how your culture was growing up, the culture you currently live in, and for helping people to say the difference between what I'm looking at and where I am isn't good or bad or more or less. It's just my perspective from where my background is sitting. So the culture map is an excellent resource. Aaron Myers talks a lot about how different countries on the whole, of course, individuals vary greatly, but different countries on the whole are valuing different aspects of collaboration or communication or privacy, and that those cultural aspects then affect how they interact online. And that would be a wonderful resource for anybody who's building a product in a culture they're a little less familiar with.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great resource to almost like meta reflect on your own culture too. Because when I hear you talk about that book, I think I should read that just to have more awareness of what sort of biases I have when I'm doing research, and even in a culture maybe that I grew up in.
Absolutely. For research
Yeah.
and also for design, I think a lot of like what looks good is based on the art culture of what we've grown up, that kind of, and if you can imagine this, even like if you're coming from maybe an American point of view, how different subcultures in America, like if you're into street art or classical art or modern art, like you can imagine people have very different sensibilities of what beautiful looks like, what clean looks like, what easy looks like. And a lot of that has to do with your own kind of preconceptions about yourself and where you sit. And so I love that idea. We're all on a journey together to kind of see ourselves. And only when we're acknowledging those differences, I think, are we able to really build the best product for the users. Because we have a privilege often as UXers to be able to look broadly across many cultures, to be able to look at analytics and data and kind of see at a high level things that in an individual level people might not be aware with, like just you're a fish, you're swimming in water, it's very hard to notice the water around you, but when you are constantly moving around and looking at different places, it gives you a beautiful new perspective.
I love that. Uh, on that note of the more the design side, the visual side, what sort of have you learned? Now, I guess I should clarify. Your current role is lead. Are you leading designers and researchers?
Researchers at Google.
Researchers
But before
specifically.
that
Okay.
at Google, I've worked on multiple interdisciplinary teams, leading those teams as well.
Okay. Because I was curious about coming from the States to you're in Singapore working with a Japanese market, because the language is written, I believe, in the opposite direction, right? Right to left instead of left to right. It's very different. It's more symbol based. I think, again, I'm talking completely out of my knowledge base right now, but that's my understanding. But what has that experience been like for, or are you working exclusively with Japanese designers who have like that knowledge baked in, or what has that experience been like?
That has been a real journey. So the reason I came to live in Singapore is so that I could work with emerging markets. I have a real passion for social justice and thinking about the climate and the effects of the content that's out there for people and where they're living. And I feel that people in what we often call the global south are not only coming online and transforming the internet, but there's sort of a sense of like, oh, if they just learn to use the internet the right way, then finally the internet, they'll be online as well. But the truth is the internet was just built for people who've already been online. And there's no right or wrong way to build or make the internet work. So I think it's pretty exciting to work on emerging markets. So I came out here initially to think a lot about India, to think a lot about Indonesia, to think about sub-Saharan Africa, think about Thailand, these kind of countries out here where you can be close, and definitely using very different writing systems, not like a Latin character set, that range a lot for people. And also, one thing I've been observing in sub Saharan Africa is that many languages there are not written languages, they're very much spoken languages, which add another layer of complexity of people using a second or third language, English or French, for example, to be able to access the internet when their main life is happening, their expertise in language is happening in yet a different language from that. So that's one big area. It's the reason I came out here into Asia, was to be able to explore emerging markets. Has been an incredible journey. Japan is like a really interesting opportunity because their written language is a combination of three different writing styles. It is often written left to right, but it also can be written up to down. It uses a mixture of these different writing systems to help translate the content and make it meaningful for people. This is mainly symbol based, but also can have a phonetics based component as well. So the long story short is Japanese language is complex, and language is just one element of our experience that we're building out on the internet. So in addition, there's an entire design component of what looks visually pleasing, and Japanese users have very different design aesthetics. If you've ever watched Japanese TV, for example, there's a lot going on, and there's important for people to have a lot of upfront information so they can draw their own conclusions. And they're used to an amount of information that looks a little overwhelming, perhaps, to a Western eye. But this is their expectation of how things work. So one of the great things about being part of this journey and learning to join this Japan team is we do have many local Japanese designers. We have many native Japanese designers work with, but we also have an international crew of folks mainly based out of Tokyo. And it's been so interesting to hear a lot of the experiences and so many subtleties that can be brought up in this kind of design work.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. But I actually want to pivot, and I want to go back to when you were working for the BBC, because I did not know that you worked on that. Is it iPlayer, right?
The iPlayer, yeah, which is still running today. The very first iteration of iPlayer.
I have to ask about that because now streaming, is ubiquitous. What was that like? Because, and something that I'm particularly curious about is because there's the whole saying, that to be early is, well, I don't remember the exact saying, but like to be early is just as bad as to be late to something. And so I'm wondering, was iPlayer too early for streaming? Like, were people not ready to adopt streaming yet, or what was that like?
Great question. So in the olden days of the knots, people were streaming video. The main way that it was happening was through torrenting. We didn't have sites like live streaming sites as per se right now. One is that the technology couldn't always handle it, but also the legal environment was not set up for this type of content. You can imagine something similar to the shift from CDs to Apple Music, this kind of idea, like how do you take digital rights and bring them online? So there was the ability in the olden days to torrent things. Everyone was using BitTorrent, and people using Napster and Kazaa. And the wonderful thing at the BBC, LimeWire, exactly. One of the wonderful things about the BBC is they own the rights to all their content. They are the producer of their content. So there's no need to go to a big studio somewhere or some historic trust and get access. They are already the owners of the digital product itself. Additionally, they have a responsibility to the British public to share their content out. So they take this responsibility very seriously and were really willing early on to develop technology that would make it possible. It wasn't that there was necessarily a technology lack at the time. It's that it hadn't really been worked out to be able to have the rights and the technology in an easy to use fashion that people could engage with. And iPlayer was a rocket ship. I don't know if you've ever heard the story about getting from Google into Facebook, in that sense that Cheryl was saying, like, well, I don't know, what role should I take? And it's like, this is a rocket ship. It doesn't matter what seat you're in. It's going astronomic. And that's exactly how iPlayer was. Like, we knew we had the right product. Everybody wanted streaming content, but it was hard to know, was it better to deliver that content over a set-top box? Was that content better delivered through internet browsers? Was it better if we had a standalone app? There's a lot of fundamental questions which seem really obvious now that we didn't know. And the first research question I was asked in this role was, would anyone ever watch television on their desktop computer? And then the second big research question I was ever asked, once I thankfully correctly answered it, that yes, people will watch television on a desktop computer, was, would anyone ever want to watch television on a mobile phone? At the time, mobile phones looked very different. The iPhone had just come out. So it was unclear if people would want to use the tool to be able to do that. And there was a lot of questions to talk about with the cellular companies to be able to have bandwidth to be able to download this content quickly enough. So it was a really interesting dance between the technology to make it possible, the digital rights to the content itself, and then the user's expectation of what should work. One example of that is, we all think about television as the streaming content these days, but the BBC also has many radio properties. How should radio content be placed? And then we're on a podcast, so what could be more appropriate than to discuss radio and audio content as well? A lot of people, especially elderly, will leave their radios on for just to have noise around the house, to have some accompaniment in the home. And it wasn't clear if it would be possible technically to present that content. Was it better to present this content through classic brands, and which are like BBC One, BBC Two? Was it better to present this content by topic? Was it better to present the content through interests? And so much of what we worked out now through our streaming tools was a total Wild West at the time at the BBC. And I really enjoyed that project. A lot.
Yeah, that is probably really, really cool to see now. Like, it's everywhere, right? In terms of audio and video. And you were charting it when it was uncharted. That's it.
Yeah,
That's like
absolutely.
that. That's like the meaty, juicy research that any researcher wants to be doing.
It was a total pleasure to be on that project. I'm so grateful for the experience. And it was an interesting one to do it inside the BBC, which itself is a very staid institution. It's not known always for its quick movement and its new technology. And it was really cool how they were able to bring in the right set of folks from around the world who could think creatively about how to combine the technology ability with the user need when that user need wasn't there yet. We didn't want to build
Yeah.
a faster horse. We wanted to build a car.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of why my first question I wanted to ask was about what were users ready to adopt it, because it seems like this was before the peak, right? Before you were doing this, before it was normalized.
Absolutely. So the idea of on demand had existed on set top boxes for a while. There was a sense that you could use your cable subscription to go back in time or use your BBC license to go back and view video products on demand. But that wasn't the main way that people were consuming television and audio at the time. Mainly it was through streaming, which meant that the program was on when it was on, and you could rewind or fast forward through it. But generally, you needed to watch what was live. And that was also a part of the culture in the UK to be able to say, hey, I'm sitting down with my family at 8 to watch the show that we all love. But if the show isn't necessarily only available at 8, and I can watch it in my bedroom as well as watching it in the family living room, how does that change dynamics in families? And then adding an extra interesting layer on top of it, since the BBC is a public trust, is there was a real interest in accessibility. How can we build a product that would be useful for everyone? And closed captioning is actually a really interesting product because it was available already on set-top boxes and on cable subscriptions that you could have closed captioning, which is a thing that I think I read a statistic somewhere that like most people are actually watching television with closed captions on at the time. This is a technology that was originally made for people who had difficulty hearing the programs. So the closed captioning or the descriptive audio was able to help deliver that. And I am so grateful to my mentors who helped me at the BBC learn, not only for people who had a visual impairment, but people also had auditory impairments, and how that universal design perspective didn't only make the product better for those people, but it also made it something that like, hey, maybe if you're listening to it in a noisy environment, now that you can take your laptop to a cafe, you'd like to have the closed captions on to be able to enjoy your program when you're not able to listen to it. So it's a wonderful, fascinating project I really enjoyed working on.
Yeah, that really hits on the notion that focusing on accessibility is for everyone, not just those who you think immediately need it. Because I mean, even think about today how global television is getting, and the use of multiple languages and more authentically bringing cultures into viewing for audiences from different parts of the world. Like none of that. I mean, I guess you could watch a Korean show in Korean, but I imagine my assumption is that there are a lot of people who enjoy Korean shows, and I'm just using that as an example, but that may listen to it in their language or use closed captioning to be able to know what they're saying.
Absolutely. It's a great example. And something we also were surprised to find out when I was over at Facebook is that we had built quite a number of products for teens, which I have to say, of all the populations I have ever worked with as a researcher, the number of places I've traveled to by boat, by train, by bus, back of a horse to get to all these sessions I've been to around the world, the craziest people I've ever talked to as participants are teenagers. I had thought maybe I was still nearly a teenager, but it was very apparent in that early research how different Gen Alpha and really late Gen Zers are from many of us in the working world, and how their expectations of the internet differ, I thought, oh, maybe I'm also
Ooh.
a digital native. It'll be really similar. It's actually really interesting to see how cultures spring up and how when they were thinking about designing for them and the desire to have privacy from parents, let's say, or guardians or teachers, but the desire to avoid bullying, that kind of dance between privacy and transparency, those dances are actually
Yeah.
really interesting because those are things that play out for the whole world when we're all thinking about our products and how they present to our users and how they're able to preserve privacy but also have transparency and accountability at the same time. So great example of that early how designing for some people, design for everybody.
Yeah. That's complex though. I think designing for teenagers, that gets difficult. I think like from a legality standpoint, I would imagine.
A very difficult population to do work with. I think one difference is the importance of involving guardians, parents with getting permission, but also to help them build that relationship as well. And even being able to accommodate people with growing bodies and growing minds who may not be able to articulate their points in a clear way that you would want to talk to an adult or so an educated person about. These are people who have sixth grade educations because they're sixth graders. Like it's very reasonable for them not to be able to articulate in complex language what they want or what they need. So, and at the same time, they are young and they may want to overshare when it isn't in their best interest. So, ethical research is a really important part of how we engage with teams as well. And similarly, when we work with enterprises, right? A lot of individuals inside a company may want to share a lot and be really transparent, but the organization as a whole does need to preserve some, you know, confidentiality so that they can have their own business there. So wherever you work in user experience, a lot of these principles play out similarly, even though they're with different groups of people.
Okay, I want to go back one more time because you hit on the fact that you worked for it was for Ford, right?
Correct.
And
Yeah, my
yeah,
first career.
yeah. Can you share a little bit about your experience working? Because this is getting even more into physical product space. Like I know you mentioned screens and there is a digital component, but a vehicle is also a physical product. So there's a lot of complexity, I think, there.
Absolutely. Ford Motor Company was the first place where I was really able to see the connection between design, engineering, and the users themselves. It was so wonderful as a new college grad or as an intern to be able to watch the robots welding combined with the experience of myself standing on the line and putting windshields on using, hydraulic lifts, combined with the ability of sitting in a design studio where you see mood boards and clay bucks of cars, which are mock-ups of either full or scaled versions of what cars could look like, all being complemented with digital technology to be able to make things more accessible for different people who use them. So I'll start first just talking about what human factors is. Human factors is a branch of engineering which is really focused on the ability for a human to operate a machine, and that machine being designed and built for that person. So it's very interested in mechanical engineering, how machines function, as well as the biology and the physiology of a person to be able to see, listen, be able to react in an important way, noting that we're all living in different bodies, that a 5%, a fifth percentile female and a 95th percentile male are really different in their sizes, in their ability to reach envelope, what they can connect to. And that isn't just fun to know or nice to design for people, but when you're driving a car and you cannot reach the brake or you cannot reach the door handle or don't have the physical strength to open it because of the angle you're sitting at, it's a safety issue. So how do we ensure there is safety for all? Well, we're building a beautiful, wonderful to sit in, engaging experience, a car you want to drive that gives you some kind of feeling, whether that's a security or fun or adventure or ruggedness or whatever you're looking for in the vehicle you're buying. So it's a really interesting complement between working with design, with engineering, and with people themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sold. I want to work for Ford now. Because
Absolutely.
you're right.
One of the best studies I ever got to do there was about designing the seats themselves. So the seat design is a extremely technical space. There's mechanical engineers who think about not only the materials that go on the seat for fire safety, for crash safety, for manufacturability, but then also those seats need to feel comfortable and they need to look beautiful and they need to be made out of great materials that are durable. So we would often run studies just as we will with digital products, where we would bring people into a laboratory and ask them to drive a car around for an hour and give us really like step by step, element by element. How does this feel on your upper back? How does this feel on your lower back? How does this feel on your hips? Measuring them ahead of time, doing range motion to be able to say, can you reach this button? Can you reach this steering wheel? To make sure that they're able to move these things around. And that results in the end with design recommendations for the product itself, which just like on a digital product where you might flip a bit for a launch, this is similarly, you need to be able to sign off as an engineer that these things are ready to be launched.
In terms of vehicles, I'm just thinking about accessibility because, right, how do you even narrow down the scope of your target audience for a vehicle, right? Like you might have like a sports car or a minivan or something, there might be a stereotype user that is drawn to that type of vehicle. But at the end of the day, a vehicle has a functional purpose, right? So any type of user is likely going to want, you have to consider everyone is what I'm trying to say. So in terms of accessibility, and this is my own just ignorance to vehicles, but like for Ford, for example, do they sell like add-ons? Like how does it work when someone wants a vehicle, but let's say their arms can't reach certain buttons or something? How do they navigate that?
So there are standards, like mainly from OSHA, from other kinds of institutions, for safety in the U.S. of what you need to design for most people. And it's a whole technical field, but at the very highest level, the summary is we design those products for everyone from a 5th percentile female, which means if you took all the women in the world and then lined them up by height, for example, or by weight, there'd be some kind of bell curve. And everyone from the 5th percentile upwards should be able to access the vehicle. And then similarly, took all the men in the world and stacked them up and then lined them up by height. And then there's, all the men all the way up to the 95th percentile need to be able to utilize the vehicle as well. So we're essentially excluding the extreme users from the analysis, but everybody else needs to be able to reach that car. And I'm 5'3", which is not super tall, but I'm nearly a 5th percentile female. And that I would work on super duty trucks. Maybe an internal joke. I don't know how they put the 20-something 5th percentile female on the largest trucks at the Ford Motor Company. But I got to work with many engineers who really embodied the culture. They were, themselves probably 95th percentile males, and that it was very easy to say, oh, we don't need to worry about building for this, arm reach length or this, physical strength, because how's it going to work? And then they would sit in the car and say, I can easily move the seat. I can easily reach the headlights. And then I'd sit in the car and be like, but I can't reach the headlight. It's too far for me. And so that embodiment of that range of physical attributes is one big thing. So there's a ton of additional thing about, physical strength, visual acuity, things like that. But generally we build for 5th percentile female to 95th percentile male. If then let's say you had mobility impairments and needed to have some kind of additional thing, that is often an aftermarket product. And there are specialists who are able to help bring those products in, designed by aftermarket engineers who then add those products onto the cars as needed for individual situation. My understanding is those are often done person by person to accommodate specific individual needs.
Okay. So I was going to say, it seems like there's a legal aspect to, because 5'3", to be close to the 5th percentile threshold is not that short, right? There's a lot of people who are 5'2", 5'1", like in the world.
In the world,
and for a car company, like I feel like you would have to account for, legally, like in my mind, I'm thinking you would have to say, if you are 5 foot, you cannot buy this vehicle legally because we can't be liable for putting you in a dangerous position.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. 5'3", just to be clear, isn't exactly fifth percentile. It's a little bit taller than that. So I don't remember the exact number for fifth percentile height. But there's also nobody's body is exactly the same, right? Like even if you have the same height, you might have extremely different length legs. You might have very different length arms. So every part of the body, as known, for example, your leg length can then affect how much pressure you can put on the brake, or your arm length depends how much you can reach the steering wheel or turn on the windshield wipers or things like that. So these different elements, and similarly, our torsos are different lengths, which means your eyes, even if you're the same height, are actually, when you're sitting down in a car, are at different heights. So the concept isn't only about height, it's also and there's measurement charts, incredibly complex tables out there about helping to make sure that each element that needs to be addressed is addressed between the fifth and 95th percentile. So, in general, most people are able to operate that car carefully. And as a human factors engineer, you do sign off with your engineering license showing that you've approved the design of that vehicle.
Well, maybe electric vehicles will solve the problem, and self-driving cars will completely
Self-driving
change
cars.
the landscape. Yeah, yeah, not
Exactly.
electrical, self-driving.
Yeah, hopefully self-driving cars can do that. And a great experience I had recently in San Francisco was getting to drive a Waymo car, or ride in a Waymo car, I should say, which is a self-driving experience. And as an automotive engineer, it was just a really interesting thing to note about what is a car's experience when there is no driver. And I think is actually
Yeah,
going to really change a lot of interesting factors inside the automotive industry.
I'm wondering at what point the seats no longer need to face forward, right? Because as
Great.
soon as the car's driving itself, then there's a social experience to prioritize, which, like the living room with the TV, when does the car just become a social experience? Which I think is quite interesting.
Super interesting. Every time I think we've solved these design solutions, like with the streaming is maybe a good example. We're like, oh, now we've solved it, like it's optimized, but then something new will come along and completely change the paradigm. And same with cars, where they've been built a certain way because carriages were designed a certain way, because carts were built a
Yeah.
certain way, because the Romans wanted their roads a certain width, and all of a sudden everything's built that way. And so I think that it'll be interesting as new technologies come out to talk about that. And I think having been in UX for 20 years now, so many of the things we assumed were true at the beginning are now seen as like
Yeah.
so outdated. Like we thought, oh, maybe people really love circular menus. That would be so great because people can see all the options laid out in a circle. If you remember the internet, all of the like late 90s, we thought that was so cool.
Mm.
And now it's like, it's obvious that there should be some kind of like menu that collapses in. There should probably be a left aligned menu unless it's on mobile. And you can see all these new design patterns that have emerged as technologies have changed. And a lot of that has to do with changes in smartphones, changes in people's ability to have connectivity while they're out. So I think it's pretty incredible to watch the pace of change.
Yeah. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you had an interest, like part of the reason why you're passionate about emerging markets had to do with sustainability. And I thought you mentioned a bit about climate. And I would love to hear maybe some of your perspective on that and how that became a passion and how does it influence your practice?
I'm so glad you asked it. This is one of my favorite topics these days. So I have been doing some introspection, thinking about 20 years of my hard-earned effort at some of these big companies, traveling around the world. What have I accomplished with that time? What are things I can look back on and feel proud? And I think many of us after the pandemic are having similar thoughts about like, what's the value of the work that I'm putting in? How am I really trying to make a difference in the world? And here's the good news I want to share with your listeners. The good news is there's no shortage of problems out there. Hard problems, really complex, sticky problems. Like the world is not solved. There are a lot of hard things that need to be solved out there. And there's a range of ways we can approach solving them. So I think and as more and more experiences and more of life is moving to a digital space, there's an opportunity for us to utilize our craft as UXers to ask questions, to build products, to try to create experiences that are empathetic. that are understanding the major issues that are there. So as I was doing my own introspection, I started learning more and more about climate change. And even I'm very grateful to, I hired a coach who helped me learn about climate change specifically. It's a very technical space and it can be quite difficult if you've been in a very technical space for a while, you've developed a career around it, to want to pivot, to want to make a change. It's, I think, one of the great things about working with kids or being around kids is they're so willing to try new stuff. But as adults, we often feel like, oh, I can't start in a new space. I'm not sure how to get started. But one thing that I've learned over time is that you should always surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. You should be the dumbest person in the room. And that is a humbling place to be. It's also an opportunity to learn and to give yourself that kind of beginner's mindset. So I was so grateful to get to learn more and more about climate change. And as I was learning about it, and through my travels going out to sub-Saharan Africa, going to India, traveling around Asia, I realized how deeply the global south has been affected by the changes in the climate. And as I'm learning more about the science of where it's going and what will be happening in our lifetimes and in our children's lifetimes, how quickly change is coming and how much we need to think about not only mitigation, but also adaptation, it'll be important for everybody to chip it in. There's actually a really great saying in the community that all jobs need to be climate jobs, no matter what we do. That if you are working at McDonald's, there's an opportunity to be in climate. If you're working in a subway train, there's opportunity to work with that. Wherever you're working, you're doing it. So I spent also a little time thinking, what could I do? I'm just one little Julie, and I know how to do this one little thing. And I felt very concerned that I could make any difference in such a massive space. And also I kept thinking, oh, digital, how much can digital really be making a difference in this? And digital contributes quite a bit to climate change. Physical technology contributes a lot to climate change. So if we're part of the problem, we can also be part of the solution. It's not that going green means only moving your bills to be digital. There's quite a number of other patterns that we can use and problems we can understand why change isn't happening today. I think particularly in UX research, being able to understand not only the stated user needs, but also the unstated user needs is going to be an important way of taking that problem. And then overall, inside user experience, we actually have a powerful method to take complex systems that, seem like there's no solution out there. Everyone just wants a faster horse. And to take those problems apart, to iterate, to start to look at them from new perspectives and come up with solutions that don't look obvious from the get-go, or maybe are lightweight MVP options that can be iterated moving forward, or maybe are large systematic solutions that need coordination with technical fields like engineering. These are skills that we are specialists at. These are things we know how to do. And there is an opportunity today for us to be part of that. This field is just getting started as UXers are starting to come and talk about sustainability. But if it's something you or your listeners are excited about, I would love to discuss with them more. I see a big opportunity for UXers to have a play inside sustainability.
Yeah, can you share any resources for someone who might be interested in learning more about it?
Absolutely. So Project Drawdown is a great resource that people can go to. It's got a wonderful website with a ton of wonderful content. It talks about what drawing down to net zero carbon could look like and has a lot of wonderful information out there about generally what climate changes look like. And you can also, as a UXer, step back and look back at how are they sharing that information? How are they using digital services to communicate that? What's their content strategy look like? How are they putting it together? And super shout out to the team over there. They're doing an incredible job with that. Another great resource is Rosenfeld, who is a great publisher of many books, has a great podcast series that they're sharing out. Sorry, it's not a podcast, it's a video series about thinking about climate and UX together. So big shout out to them for the work they're doing. And I'm also happy to share that we'll be putting together a UX Evenings at Google episode where we'll talk specifically about climate and UX.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to check those out because I want to ask an optimistic question, but I also want to ask sort of a pessimistic question. So I guess which do you want first?
Let's start with the bad news.
Okay. Okay, so the more cynical question I have is about getting business buy-in around something that might not seem like it will drive the bottom line. And you could argue it will drive the bottom line. That's the best case scenario. But I'm just curious, are there strategies or is there any thought in the UX space around how do we sell this to business partners?
I've been thinking a lot about this as well because my experience talking to people in this space from different companies around the world is that some of the biggest resistors to it are actually the product teams themselves. We already have a lot to do. We already have a lot of constraints. And to add one more constraint and one more layer of difficulty, it just feels like a lot. In addition, there's a business level question. I think that, is this going to be the right thing for my shareholders? Does this drive our key metrics? Those are real questions. But we in UX have faced these questions before. When our fields began, when we started coming in as being usability engineers, some of the early titles in UX evangelists, there was a lot of questions of like, well, what's the business value of making something easy to use? What's the point of that? Why would we do that? And through those methods that we employed, we were able to convince whole organizations to change their path. And there were even hero use cases like, wow, look at how Apple has taken this and how they've used that concept not only in their products, but in their marketing and their entire suite of products to bring that user experience clear. And so that gave everybody an ability to say, oh, now I see what you mean by that. I think what can be tricky with climate change is it's not only experienced at an individual level, like, wow, it was so hot this last Father's Day that we couldn't have our usual barbecue outside. Or like, oh, wow, there's another biggest ever storm hit my town and the road got flooded and we couldn't go to work today. Those are, individual experiences we're having. Additionally, things are happening at our community levels, right? Like inside our families, inside our, governments about what is the right amount of effort to be putting into addressing these issues. And that window of time where mitigation is possible is narrowing over time quickly. I think one for myself, the moral aspect of wanting to be living on this planet in 30 years in a comfortable planet where I feel, like I could go for a walk and the air quality is great and it's not fire season like we have in California today, is my big motivator for myself, but also for my children. I really want to be able to look at them and say, hey, I did everything I could to make that happen. So I think there's just so many levels to the question, right? And each person needs to address that for themselves. And so when you're bringing these arguments inside an organization, authenticity counts. Like people will do and try for things when they can hear authentic concern, see real problems, and relate it to their own experience. One of the big opportunities I think for UX is to take this distributed problem to be able to say, wow, like, you know, how much carbon is in the air has so little connection to me at the bank I work at, or like so little connection to my app I'm putting out on the App Store. But actually, it does have a lot of potential. Like, there's so much we could do to make systems easier to explain, easier to understand. And that's a big opportunity for UXers in ways we haven't even thought about before. How we monetize it is a good question. But I think that also involves policymakers and carbon markets to shift those things as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what I actually, as you were speaking, I was kind of thinking about that a little bit, like the policy side of it and how often businesses are, like you hear often from at least big tech, like they work with what they can work with. I mean, it's a bit of an unmoral perspective, maybe, but it's a business perspective that like they work within the constraints of policy.
Yeah, very much makes sense. And I think there's more and more work being done about how to communicate to governments and to policymakers the intensity of the situation that's facing us and the importance of acting today, if not acting 20 years ago, the importance of action today to prepare ourselves for what is undoubtedly going to be a huge transformation in the next 20 years. So I think that's a big opportunity for UXers to be part of that conversation. I think that also sometimes because many of us are industry UXers, industry researchers, we're aligned to very financial incentives about, where we can get great salaries and where we can get great stock options. And a lot of the tech industry is aligned to that, which has driven us to, I gotta say, amazing places. We built crazy things nobody's ever imagined could have a TV slash telephone slash all the things you have in your pocket when you walk around today. People who spend whole days doing their banking, and now they can just like on the bus quickly do all their finances. So much has opened up that we have an opportunity also to find alignments and build momentum as a community, because it is something wherever you're sitting, anywhere on the planet, you're going to be affected by in the future.
Totally. So then the optimistic question was more, I'm just curious around any suggestions, recommendations, or I mean, maybe stories that speak to how people are successfully creating change within the UX
Absolutely.
space in relation to climate.
Yeah, it's still early days, so I think that like any efforts are most welcome. And I have a little group called climateux.net where we're kind of sharing
Weird.
stories and ideas about how we can think about this kind of work. So if you have an idea, please, to your listeners, I'd love for them to share their stories and their ideas. But I think some great examples are out there today, and I'll just highlight a few that I'm most familiar with from my work inside Google. So, if you've searched for a flight lately on Google, you might notice that Google Flights shows you carbon, how much carbon is
Yep.
being released by the particular flight you're on. And whether or not people are actually making their final purchase decisions on that, that is an important place in their info seeking journey for them to know this kind of information. And that's a big opportunity for us inside our products to utilize existing climate frameworks to label things in a similar way, right? So there can be a clearer design language about what a more eco-friendly choice could look like. Similarly, there's a solar roofs project that you can look, at least currently inside the US, where you can go to this website, type in your address inside the US, and it can tell you how much money or how much energy you can generate from solar panels on the roof of your personal specific house. So it's not an
Oh,
abstract idea, but it's a really specific personal decision. And you can say, my house will generate X amount of energy, and I currently use Y amount of energy. And so I'd be able to sell it back to the grid and make Z amount of money. So it's quite specific, quite regional, has to do with energy providers, and you can bring your own data to it, which is pretty cool. Another great
that
example is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that's actually pretty neat because you also are adding a personal incentive uh, to, I mean, because you mentioned there's a potential for gain, like for profit, individual profit. And if you can
Uh-huh.
monetize better practices, that's a great incentive for most people.
Absolutely. Similarly, I can imagine a future with this thing coming with rainwater collection. That rain's going to become, water has become a more and more precious resource, and as it literally falls out of the sky, and many of us have roofs that can capture said water. What might people want to do to be able to capture rainwater and treat it and store it in safe ways? So I think there's a ton of interesting opportunities around that, and that's only in the uh, purely digital consumer aspect. I think additionally, there's other great resources out there as well related to helping people create startups that create sustainable change. So Google has a sustainable startups program where there's like an incubator that you can join, and all these great resources for startups themselves who are focused on sustainable products to access and to be part of. And if people are interested in hearing about more examples from this, you could follow me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm UX Julie at, and you can hear more every week. I try to tweet out an example of one or two of these different projects that I've been watching, not only from Google, but from around the web. I find that so many different ways for us to implement these ideas into our own goals.
I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned the idea of sort of a universal design language around sustainability. And that might be something that already exists, but it would be probably really valuable to standardize, like maybe it's a kind of like a design system or something. But because like you mentioned, the CO2 emissions, I do think that's neat that Google has placed that right in the flow, at the time where the information is relevant. But as a novice to this space, I actually don't know how to use that information. And so having more of a design language that's universal around sustainability, I think would be kind of like how recycling has, well, to be honest, I don't really understand that symbolism well, and I should probably, but being able to make it more accessible to the average user would be quite beneficial, I think.
Absolutely. I think there is some early efforts in the design language, just like we were talking about before, about how those early standards are on video streaming.
Yeah,
Seems so
yeah,
obvious now. They're clearly the
yeah.
play button should float over the video and the timeline should be at the bottom. None of that was obvious for us in the
Right, right.
beginning, right? Like you don't know those things till they become a standard. And part of the way they become a standard is because people interact with successful products that use them as standards. So this is another field that is just super early days. There aren't clear answers on what design languages look like, although several people have started proposing them in UX conferences and academic spaces. A lot of what I think we'll need to think about when we build such a design language is around uh, helping behavioral economics take place. How do we create language and patterns that actually change users' behavior? Because it's like you said, it's nice to know that X many tons of carbon were emitted by the airplane, but if you don't know how many tons of carbon you emit and how much that flight usually emits and how much can you cut back and is it even worthwhile to cut back if that number is so big?
Yeah,
It's really hard to know. Like, is this a good or a bad choice for myself? And that change, helping people make good choices using behavioral economics and nudges, I think is a big opportunity for that design language.
totally. I totally agree with you, because in my mind I'm thinking, and then how do you incentivize, like, what are my options, right? Like I might know that the flight that I want to take is not good for the environment, but I'm still going to go to where I'm going. So do I have a better option? Like do I have choice? Is there choice, right? Is there really agency in it, or do I just feel bad because I'm hurting the environment?
Right. So
Well,
that's an example of like, can we change people's decision making process? But there's also,
yeah.
offsets are fraught, but have a quite opportunity. There's a lot of ways to help support mitigation that doesn't involve in changing your original plans, right? So maybe mitigation
Yeah.
is a way that you could also think about. Also, maybe you can take part of your route to through high speed trains, right? Like if maybe though there's a train route that like originally you searched for a flight to go somewhere, but actually you could fly to some hub and then from there take a low
Oh,
carbon train somewhere. That's another interesting, like maybe those are, you can give people search answers they didn't query for, right? Like give them options
right.
that they
Nudging
initially
them.
didn't even, give them a nudge to go in a more eco-friendly way. Or maybe to stay, if they're in a hotel search, that's another space, right? Hotels and the tourism industry can be quite wasteful and have huge carbon footprints. And I know you can sit in your hotel room and be like, wow, they use this kind of cheap plastic toothbrush that's cheaper than the other cheap plastic toothbrush that they were using before. That's one step. But there's a lot of people who are innovating in this space, trying to create low carbon resorts and low carbon hotels. And so, what does that look like? How do we help consumers make good choices about them and also help that community empowered to stick together? I think just like with accessibility that we were talking about earlier, where early on with the internet, it was like, it's a nice thing to do to help those blind people use the internet. And then standards were developed and language was developed. And more importantly, a design philosophy around universal design that not designing for some people on the margins is actually going to help the overall experience for everybody. That universal design principle, I think there's something here with sustainability as well, where we're not there yet. We're certainly at an early stage, but I definitely want to put out a call to folks who are interested in that space to collaborate together, because you don't need to be sitting at Google search and fixing it. You can be on any product and be aligning to those clear goals, because everybody feels, I think, the same way. They want to do something, but it's hard to know as a UXer what to do.
Yeah, yeah. I like this idea you're exploring, though, because I agree. I think uh giving people, like, as search becomes more sophisticated, as it seems to be becoming more sophisticated, it seems as though there is a lot of potential to show people options based on values and priorities, right? Because if you search for something and the top five, like they say, rarely do people click on page two, supposedly, of a search, right? But so if the first five things are all hotel, 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 chain, right? Hilton, Marriott, da da da, you're not even seeing options that you may choose because based on your values.
Absolutely. And it's not only in info seeking, we've all, I think, read about the carbon footprint and the carbon intensity of Bitcoin mining or of generative AI, that running the computers, that kinds of cycles that these things require has a real carbon footprint that is truly bad for the world. And as more and more products are gaining these capabilities, it isn't clear yet how do we offer the capability without increasing our energy usage. It's a good question. Nobody knows how to fix that problem yet, where the market's moving one way and energy is moving yet a completely different way. So that's one big opportunity, I think, to think about the energy consumption of our work as well. But I read an interesting fact I read the other day is that if you are looking at carbon usage in the carbon emissions, I'm saying, inside the world, if you just looked at communication products like chat apps and how much energy they take and how much carbon they emit because of the energy they're using, they would be the fourth largest emitter of carbon on the planet. So after the big countries you're already thinking of, chat apps themselves are extremely carbon intensive. You can imagine the histories they keep, the connectivity, the energy that it takes to push out these messaging products. And as more and more things are starting to have generative AI inside their chat app, you can imagine that the usage of energy in our industry it's a real concern about how do we do that. So it's not only inside of one type of digital product. All digital products are part of this discussion.
Man, the more we are talking, my awareness of my own carbon footprint is just exploding. I'm like, oh man. But again, it shows that like I consider myself in this space to be novice, like ignorant, and I think that that's the average person. Like I consider myself to be quite average in my awareness of climate, like to be honest. And so to me, what that says is if I actually am average, like the average person needs to be more aware. Like, how do we make people more aware?
Yeah, and bring this very complicated systemic problem down to an individual decision. Because even if every single person, brought their recycled bag and carried their water bottle and stopped using single-use plastic, we all individually did our best, and more than our best, did it perfectly, we still would be only contributing about 40% reduction of all the carbon that needs to be reduced. The lion's share of this is coming from corporations, from big industries, from governments, and I hope actually many of the places you listeners are sitting, probably a lot of their own countries are large emitters. So I'm guessing that being part of those systems, we also can use our UX tools to be able to make it more relatable, to talk about that more. I think there's, some interesting opportunities, like what could be more powerful than using empathy and exploring the use case of empathy as part of that? What could be more powerful than iteration to help people find solutions that really work for them without judgment, without kind of a sense of this is the right or the best thing to do? Because one of the great things that we've been able to do in UX is make all sorts of products accessible for all sorts of people in all sorts of platforms. And I think this is another opportunity for UXers to kind of apply our superpowers to solve this problem that everybody needs to be solving together.
Yeah, I think that's a great ending point for the topic. I could pick your brain about it for another 2 hours, but I think we'll stop there, and I'll just say I have two just sort of questions that I like to ask. The first question is just, do you have a UX or work-related opinion that you might hesitate to share in a meeting?
Ooh, what a nice one. If you've worked with me, I don't hesitate to share my opinion. I'm from Detroit, and people are pretty direct in those meetings. I think one thing that we always are considering as UX researchers, as UXers in this field, is how to collaborate inside of a product team. And I think our goal is to be the voice of the user, but in the end, we are all building a product together. We're all playing on the same team, the same names on all of our jerseys. We're all building it together. So there are times that I think it can be hard to bring up user insights in a particular setting if they disagree with the direction things are going.
Yeah.
And instead of maybe like getting upset about that and pointing out, oh, nobody's listening to my research and nobody's taking my new direction, you should think like a product owner. You have an opportunity to iterate and to build out product direction. Why do only PMs get to write PRDs? You can also write PRDs. You also can code prototypes. Use the AI. Like there's so many no code solutions out there. You can try out a lot of things these days, try on hats that you were not comfortable with before, because I think we're all aware our stakeholders are more than comfortable giving their own voice of their own user of themselves rather than looking at a broad suite of data. So I think it's really important to not only come with no, it's not working, but really to come with a potential new solution based on the insights you've gathered and the UX directions that you think could be developed.
That's a fantastic answer. What do you mean our stakeholders don't just listen to us? What do you mean?
I'm sure that only happens in my organization.
Yeah, that sounds like a you problem. So.
That's gotta be just me.
Okay, then my final question is just a question from a mentee. And what they want to know is, how do you know when it's time to look for a new job?
This is a hard one because I think a lot of us take career opportunities as they come along. When someone comes and offers you a new job, then you take it. And we don't think a lot about how to chart our own careers. And of course, everyone's at a very different point in their career. Everyone has a different set of skills in a different job market, have their own responsibilities. But one signal for me that helped me think about a pivot towards focusing more on climate is if you're getting out of bed in the morning and you're like, wow, it's another day making the donuts, and you're not excited and you're not really like feeling like you're bringing your best work to it, it's important to ask yourself, where is that coming from? That it's okay to be like, oh, my passion isn't this app I'm building for some bros in Silicon Valley. That's okay. Not everyone has to be passionate about their 9 to 5. But if you feel a reluctance, if you feel a concern, and that is an opportunity to kind of do some self-introspection about what is lighting you up, what is getting you excited. There's a great number of activities out there that can help you with it. One of my favorites is Strengths Finder. I think originally from Gallup. I think it's under a new company now. It's a wonderful way to kind of look at your own skill set rather than saying, oh man, I'm so bad at writing reports or communicating with stakeholders or whatever thing your boss has given you feedback in the past about. Rather than saying like, oh, I need to like get up to average, say instead, wow, I have these talents, these things, these superpowers, these strengths that are so easy for me to do, that give me a lot of joy. How can I look for roles, either inside the place where I am now or out somewhere else, that better align with that? And the example would be like, I am not good at keeping track of specific items on ticking things off a checklist. That is something I find really stressful and exhausting. And I found out about 10 years ago, some people love doing that. That's actually like their favorite part of the job, when they can like tick things off and keep track of lists. So what I've often done is then say, hey, I'm in the job and feeling this like, ugh, I need to change. I need to get out of here. I'll take some of your work. I love the like bounce the ball against the wall, see what happens. Let's ideate for hours and have nothing come out of it. That gives me energy. I'm good at that. I really don't like the other side of it. Can we switch some tasks around? So not only do you need to leave the job, but you can also recraft the job itself to better fit your goals. I think we all I'm a pretty realistic person. This is not a economy where jobs are running around everywhere and there's a zillion jobs to have. I think there's opportunities to find your own path that aligns to your interests, that aligns to your skills, that aligns to your strengths inside the organization you are. And sometimes the most important thing to do is to ask for it, not to be scared that you can't find that. There's a really cool framework called like the bigger game, which is like, where's that moment that makes you gulp, where you're like, oh my God, but if I said that, I can't say that out loud. But what would happen if you did say it? And does that get you closer to the thing? Right. The thing is, the reaction is probably going to be better than you thought. So my 2 cents is just look at the where your own motivation's sitting, look at where your own strengths are being utilized. And if you're feeling like that's not there, either find ways to repackage where you are now or explore somewhere else. And that will help you find those fantastic projects that make you look back and say, I'm so excited to share with you, Jay, these experiences and case studies that I've had over time, because there are opportunities in our industry to make a big difference. And we have been trained in a really special skill set that can help transform whole fields.
What a great answer. Yeah. And in terms of you mentioned the framework around saying the thing out loud. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to hear no, and then you still have a job. Like,
It's scary to be brave. It's really hard and really scary. And all of us are doing it in small ways in our work, but sometimes the imagined future, what does Kant say? Like, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. I think there is a sense of like, it's okay to ask for things and not get them, but you're certainly not going to get them if you don't ask for it.
Totally. Well, Julie, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being here and for teaching me about my own carbon footprint. You mentioned where people can find you online. Can you just say those places again for us?
Absolutely. On LinkedIn and on Twitter, I'm UX Julie at. So you can find me at UX Julie. And I also have a conversation where I'm talking about climate change. If you want to join that conversation, that's climateux.net. And I hope that you'll be able to join also an upcoming event. It's hosted on Google Design's YouTube channel. It's called UX Evenings at Google. We've had a number of them. You can check out the past playlist, but we'll have an upcoming one about climate. It's recorded, so you can join live and ask questions of presenters, but you can also watch it on replay as well.
Well, thanks again, and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Jay. Thanks for inviting me. Have a great day.